if you look at this whole thing, the whole situation could fill up an entire episode of Dueling Decades.
Dueling Decades. All right, Mike Ranger, you pick up a point in our first round and you take control of the board. What category are we going with next?
Well, I think we're going to go with hot products, Mark. All right, so I found an ad in the Miami Herald on June 26, 1980, for a store called Electronic Picture House. This is one of Big Al's sensuous sales. And for the low price of $39.95, which is actually pretty cheap for the time period, you can take yourself home a few new releases from Magnetic Video, like The Muppet Movie, Alien, Boys from Brazil, A Man, a Woman in a Bank, and my pick, because the title just sucks, 1979's The Onion Field. Only problem is, apparently the movie doesn't suck, and James Woods' performance was praised by critics. The film is based off the 1973 true crime book of the same name. The story is about a LA police officer who was murdered in the onion fields. Tagline for the movie is, "What happened in the onion field is true, but the real crime is what happened after."
Ooh. What happened after?
I don't know, but Ted Danson's in it.
Oh, wow. He bought a bar, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. He split to Boston and bought a bar.
Yeah. All right, Mancrush, what did you bring for the hot products round?
All right, so much like Mike, let's go down to the Miami area and let's go to June 10th of 1990. And this one, it starts out as a hot product and it ends with the First Amendment. So how's that for the hot products round? This was a huge story back in 1990, and you know, the more people are told that they couldn't listen to this band or buy the album, the more people who wanted to buy the album and go see this band. And those people who wanted to go see them were mostly teenagers, and the people that they were trying to protect were teenagers. So tell me how this whole thing actually made good sense, you know? So anyway, the Club Futura, that's in Hollywood, Florida, they were holding a concert for the infamous rap group Two Live Crew. And in an article that I found describing the scene before the event, there were very strict rules for this concert. For one, there would be no one under the age of 18 allowed into the X-rated show. Also banned from this concert were beads, bandanas, hats, or scarves. I don't know why, but that's what they wrote.
Because bandanas, wearing colored bandanas, mean you belong to certain gangs. You know, another movie I did.
Yeah, I suppose so, right? What about the beads, though? Did they think they were throwing them on stage? Like, I didn't understand that one. Or scarves. Who the hell's wearing a scarf in Hollywood, Florida?
Maybe they were anal beads?
Possibly. Don't bring anal beads to the club. I mean, that's just kind of a given, but it happens, I suppose. They got to throw that rule out there. But if you had any of that stuff, you either had to get rid of it or you're not coming through the door. Tickets to this sold out show, they were just $20, which is roughly $40 in 2021. But this concert, it was so popular that there were actually two shows. So at 10 p.m., there was a G-rated performance for all ages, which was mostly the people in that line that I was talking about before. And that's actually correct. Two Live Crew agreed to have one show at 10 p.m. so that the club owner wouldn't get hassled by the law. And then they agreed to come back on at 1 a.m. for the adult-only X-rated performance. And that's when things got crazy with this one. Aside from nearly 400 concert goers, and they were all crammed into this little Club Futura, there were also dozens of protesters in the street in support of the band's right to free speech. And just as they said they would, Two Live Crew, they took the stage at 1 a.m. They performed the naughty versions of all their songs. And all the while, there were undercover detectives in the audience documenting the band's performance throughout the night. So they didn't want to do anything during the show. They didn't want to cause a riot or anything. So once the concert ended, the Hollywood Police Department, they end up like waiting like a block or two, and then they pull over Two Live Crew's limo, and they end up arresting Luke Skywalker Campbell. And what was the other guy's name? Mike, you probably know better than me. Chris Fresh Kid Ice. I think that's what his name. It's his last name. They always forget. I think it's Wagwan. And they charged both these guys with a misdemeanor of performing obscene material. So they waited out, and like by this, the news article I found, they were talking about like a dozen cops were there doing this. A dozen cops were in the audience documenting this thing going on, only to bust these guys with a misdemeanor. and they'd end up being freed from jail without even having to post bail within 2 hours. So how worth it was that? But anyhow, like all this was because U.S. District Judge, it was Jose Gonzalez. He made a ruling on June 6th. The Two Live Crew's album, As Nasty as They Want to Be, is obscene, and the police could arrest any store owner that was caught selling that album, which they actually did at the time. So they also didn't want them to play live. And the band thought if they played the second show at 1 a.m., it would all be good because it was adult only. Obviously, it didn't matter because they still got arrested. If you look at this whole thing, the whole situation could fill up an entire episode of Dueling Decades. So I'm going to leave it at that. But Two Live's Crew, their album, As Nasty as They Want to Be, this would go on to become their most popular album as a group. They sold over 2 million copies with this one. They reached number 29 on the Billboard 200. And then the single Me So Horny, it would hit number 26 on the Billboard Hot 100. And not to mention, they paved the way for any group along the way in terms of freedom of speech with this, because they got like, oh, I mean, in 1992, this whole thing just got reversed, you know? So for the Hot Products round, that's all. Grab a ticket, go down to Club Futera and see Two Live Crew. If you're under 18, G-rated. If not, you get the X-rated show.
Wow. Sign me up. All right. So for my hot product this week, we're also going to get back on that bus and go pick up another set of concert tickets. So this week, I get to talk about somebody I don't get a chance to bring up enough here on the show, Mr. James Marshall Hendrix. You know, everybody knows, as big of a Deadhead as I am, I actually found Jimmy a few years before I found the Dead. And you know how everybody kind of has like that one album that as soon as you pop it on in your mind, it just takes you right back to high school? Oddly enough for me, that's Jimi Hendrix's Axis Bold as Love. So in June of 1970, Hendrix was in the middle of his final U.S. tour, the Cry of Love tour. For this tour, Jimmy brought back drummer Mitch Mitchell along with bassist Billy Cox. And by the end of June 1970, many were actually saying that Jimmy had lost his luster. And even Mitch Mitchell said about the shows that these gigs were mostly unmemorable. They were the same old places. Yet again, if it had been something completely different, that would have been great. But this was like the old band, but much less exciting. In an article in the Boston Globe, June 29th, 1970, it reads, Jimi Hendrix, who didn't quite sound like the guitarist we used to know, stood on the Boston Garden stage Saturday night more as a monument to the originator of today's heavy rock music titan than as the Titan gearing up for a performance. And then toward the end of the article, he takes a shot at Jimmy by saying Hendrix didn't seem to get too overly involved with his music as he used to. Perhaps it's because he just recovered from a breakdown he had about a year ago where he had to cancel all his tour dates. It really didn't matter to the starry-eyed crowd, he says, which were between the ages of 18 and 21, whose feelings were just about summed up by someone who shouted, Hendrix is God. Another review in Boston After Dark, June 29th, 1970, said that Hendrix, he was his normal, clever self, but it wasn't the same dynamic tension of just 2 years ago. People loved him. They clapped. They applauded when necessary. They generally approved. And I guess that's all that really matters. So if you read anything about Hendrix on this time, the media was very critical of him on this final tour. Maybe it was because Hendrix had become a little more politically charged at this time. Clearly, they were not listening to the music. The fans were still with Jimmy, and the music was actually really good. I'm actually a huge fan of Jimi Hendrix's older work. When you take songs like Machine Gun, which is not only important for its social commentary, but musically, that song gave us riffs and signatures and a style that would shape rock and metal for years to come. Then you have songs like Room Full of Mirrors, Dolly Dagger, just excellent stuff in the late career of Jimi Hendrix. So I give you tickets to the Cry of Love tour, June 1970. Don't listen to the critics. The music was fantastic.
Okay.
He's leaving with that.
I had to step away for a second. You'll see why. So I got to make my pick first, though, right?
Yeah.
As much as I'm a giant Jimi Hendrix fan, I'm going to have to go with the Two Live Crew story. I think that's a great story. And I saw that in a documentary, and that's a famous story. So I love it. So I'm going with that. But when I say Jimi Hendrix is my guy, I'm not kidding. I don't know if you can see me. There you go. I drew this picture. This
Oh,
is
wow.
this is a copy of it. It was 11 by 16 by hand when I was 16 years old. My son has it now. It's one of my more proud art things that was taken off of a thing called Note for Note, Jimi Hendrix Note for Note. It shows you how to play some songs. But yeah, Hendrix invented lead guitar. Let's just leave it at that. And the best story I ever heard was Eric Clapton took Pete Townsend to see Hendrix, and they both thought at that point they would never, they were out of a job. That's how good Jimi Hendrix is.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, what's that one song that Clapton did with God, who's the other guitarist? It was a Jimi Hendrix song, and they needed two guitarists to do the same thing that he did. Was it Littlefoot? Like,
well, I know he did a cover of Stone Free for a tribute album.
Oh, I heard that. No, I'm talking about, this is like early 70s.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to go back and check that out.
Yeah, it's on my Spotify.